There's a waterway so small you could drive across it in 30 minutes. And if it closes tonight, fuel prices double, supermarkets empty, and trillions vanish before lunchtime. This is the Strait of Hormuz, and this is what a closure actually looks like. First, let's understand what we're actually talking about. Pull up a map of the Middle East. Find the Persian Gulf, that long body of water surrounded by Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar. Now look where it narrows into a tiny bottleneck before opening into the Indian Ocean. That bottleneck is the Strait of Hormuz. And through that bottleneck flows approximately 20 million barrels of oil every single day. To put that in perspective, the entire United States consumes about 20 million barrels per day. So the Strait of Hormuz is moving more oil than America uses, every 24 hours, without stopping. On any given day, dozens of supertankers are lined up to pass through it. These aren't regular ships. These are the largest moving objects ever built by humans, as long as 4 football fields, carrying enough oil to power a mid-sized country for a week. And they all have to squeeze through shipping lanes that are just 3.7 kilometers wide in each direction. The countries depending on this route are not small players. Japan gets over 90% of its oil through Hormuz. South Korea, India, China, all critically dependent. Even Europe, which has diversified its energy sources for decades, still feels the shockwaves when Hormuz sneezes. But here's the part that most people miss. It's not just oil. Liquefied natural gas, petrochemicals, the raw materials that make plastics, fertilizers, medicines, and thousands of products you use every day. All of it flows through this passage. Now, what happens when it stops? Day 1. The world holds its breath. Let's run the simulation. It's 6 a.m. The closure has just been confirmed. Tankers have halted. No ship is moving through the strait. By 8 a.m., the first commodity markets open in Asia. The moment the news hits the trading floors, oil futures spike. Not by 5%, not by 10%. In previous historical disruptions, even small ones, oil prices have jumped 30 to 50% within hours of a credible threat to Hormuz's supply. A full closure? Some analysts estimate oil could breach $150 to $200 per barrel before lunchtime. By 10 a.m., airlines start doing math. A long-haul flight from London to Singapore burns roughly 75,000 litres of fuel. At doubled oil prices, the fuel cost alone for that single flight could more than double overnight. Within hours, airlines begin cancelling routes. Cargo carriers start suspending operations. By noon, panic buying begins at gas stations across Asia, Europe, and beyond. Not because the fuel isn't there yet, the world has strategic reserves, but because humans, when afraid, act fast. By 3 p.m., the first emergency meetings are happening at government level across 6 continents. By midnight on day 1, the global shipping industry is in crisis mode. Dozens of supertankers are now sitting idle, loaded with billions of dollars of oil with nowhere to go. The world has just lost its most critical artery, and this is only day 1. Week 1. The ripple becomes a wave. Here's something most people don't realize about oil disruptions. The pain doesn't arrive all at once. It moves in waves. And by week 1, those waves start hitting places you'd never expect. Next step, at day 2 to 3, the fuel price cascade. Gas stations from Tokyo to Paris begin adjusting prices. But it's not just your car. Trucks run on diesel, trains run on electricity generated partly by gas, ships run on heavy fuel oil. Every form of transport on Earth is connected to oil pricing. When fuel gets 40% more expensive, moving anything food, medicine, electronics, construction materials becomes dramatically more costly. Overnight. Day 4. The food supply warning. This one surprises people. Why does an oil closure affect food? 2 reasons. First, modern industrial farming runs on fertilizers, and fertilizers are made from natural gas. Qatar, one of the world's largest natural gas exporters, ships directly through Hormuz. A sustained closure disrupts fertilizer supply chains that feed hundreds of millions of people. Second, every container of food that moves by truck or ship is now significantly more expensive to transport. Supermarkets begin rationing. Prices spike on basics. Bread, rice, cooking oil, things people in 35 different countries rely on for daily survival, start becoming harder to access. Day 5. The manufacturing slowdown. Factories in South Korea, Japan, and China that run on Gulf energy start calculating how long their reserves will last. Most industrial facilities hold between 30 and 90 days of fuel reserves. But in an environment of global panic, Nobody is willing to use those reserves without a clear timeline for reopening. Production begins slowing down. Automobile plants, electronics manufacturers, steel mills all start throttling output. Day 7, the economic number. By the end of week 1, economists begin publishing estimates. The cost of a sustained Hormuz closure, not a war, not an invasion, just a closure, has been modeled at somewhere between $1 trillion and $3 trillion in global economic damage per month. That's not a typo, per month. And now everyone is asking the same question: aren't there backup routes? Doesn't the world have a plan B? The answer is yes. And also kind of. Let's look at what exists. The world is not completely unprepared for a Hormuz disruption. Decades of geopolitical anxiety have produced several alternative routes and systems. But when you look closely at each one, a pattern emerges. They're just not big enough. Pipeline Hasson, Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, Petroline. This is the crown jewel of Hormuz alternatives. Built in the 1980s, specifically because Saudi Arabia recognized the risk of depending entirely on the Gulf exit. The Petroline runs 1,200 kilometers across the Arabian Peninsula, from oil fields in the east, all the way to the Red Sea coast at Yanbu. From Yanbu, tankers can sail north through the Suez Canal or south toward Asia without ever passing near the Strait of Hormuz. Impressive, right? Here's the problem. The Petroline's maximum pipe capacity has been expanded to around 7 million barrels per day, but the port terminals at Yanbu can realistically load closer to 4 to 4.5 million barrels per day. Remember, Hormuz carries 20 million barrels per day. So even running this at full port capacity, you're replacing roughly 20% of the lost flow. The rest 16 million barrels has no alternative route. Pipeline Hash-2, the UAE's Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, ADCOP. The UAE built this specifically for this scenario. A 400-kilometer pipeline that bypasses the strait entirely, moving Emirati crude from Abu Dhabi's interior to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, which sits outside the strait. At full capacity, it moves 1.5 to 1.8 million barrels per day. Helpful. But again, compared to 20 million, it's a fraction. Option Hash-3, Strategic Petroleum Reserves, SPRs. The United States alone holds around 400 million barrels in its Strategic Petroleum Reserve, a massive underground storage system in Texas and Louisiana. The International Energy Agency coordinates releases from member countries during crises. In theory, if every major economy released reserves simultaneously, they could soften the shock for 60 to 90 days. But releases take time to coordinate. They take time to physically move, and they're designed as buffers, not solutions. Nobody's strategic reserve can run forever. Option Hash-4, the Suez Canal and Sumed pipeline. Some Gulf oil already travels north through the Red Sea and into the Mediterranean via the Suez Canal or the Sumed pipeline alongside it. But these routes add thousands of kilometers for tankers coming from the deep Gulf, and they have their own capacity ceilings and their own geopolitical vulnerabilities. The picture that emerges from all of this is uncomfortable. The world spent billions of dollars and decades of engineering building alternatives to the Strait of Hormuz. And together, all of those alternatives can cover at best roughly 20 to 25% of what Hormuz carries daily. So why hasn't the world simply built more pipelines, more capacity, more alternatives? Because of geography. The Persian Gulf is an enclosed body of water with only one exit. You cannot build a pipeline from Iraq or Kuwait or Iran that doesn't cross some other country's territory, countries with their own politics, their own risks, their own demands. The Saudi and UAE pipelines exist because those countries have the internal geography and political stability to build them. Most Gulf producers don't have that luxury. And pipelines take decades to build, cost tens of billions of dollars, and require political agreements between nations that don't always get along. There's also the capacity question. To fully replace Hormuz via land pipelines, you'd need to build roughly 4 to 5 times the current alternative pipeline capacity. The infrastructure investment required would be in the hundreds of billions of dollars before you even factor in the land rights, the construction timelines, or the environmental challenges of crossing some of the most extreme desert terrain on Earth. The math simply doesn't work, at least not within any realistic planning window. And so, we arrive at a strange conclusion. Despite everything, despite the strategic reserves, the bypass pipelines, the decades of contingency planning, the global economy still fundamentally depends on a narrow strip of water that sits in one of the most geopolitically sensitive regions on Earth. Here's what makes the Strait of Hormuz different from every other global risk we talk about. It's not a problem anyone can solve. It's a vulnerability the world has simply learned to live with. Governments know it, oil companies know it, economists know it. And yet, every day, 20% of the world's oil rolls through that narrow passage because there is no realistic alternative, and there may not be for decades. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most important body of water in the global economy, more critical than the Suez Canal, more critical than the Panama Canal, more critical than any river, any road, or any port on Earth. And while everyone is focused on Hormuz, one project is being built right now that can make the Panama Canal obsolete overnight. That's our next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it.